There comes a time when the ground beneath your life begins to rumble, not outwardly, but inwardly. Nothing has changed on the surface, yet you feel it, a tremor in the soul, an unease that won't let you rest. This isn't chaos, this is the beginning. It is the psyche preparing for transformation. It does not ask for permission. It reveals, it demands, and it waits, silently, stubbornly, until you pay attention. There are moments in life when the outer world continues as usual. Your friends still laugh, your job still pays, your calendar still fills. Yet something inside you begins to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. Like a slow leak in a sealed room, you notice it not by sound, but by a change in atmosphere. You wake up one morning and realize that what once excited you now feels dull. The goals you used to chase begin to look like cages. The conversations you once found satisfying now ring hollow. You laugh at the same jokes, but the laughter doesn't reach your core. You go through the motions, but the soul no longer dances with you. This isn't depression. It's not even sadness. It is a quiet unraveling, a sacred kind of restlessness that no external success can soothe. You may even feel guilty for feeling this way. On paper, everything appears fine. You are supposed to be content, but the psyche doesn't respond to paper. It responds to truth, and the truth is this: something in you is outgrowing the life you have constructed. At first, the discontent whispers. It might come as a mild frustration, a repeated sigh, a fleeting thought like there must be more than this. But if ignored, it grows louder. The psyche, ever loyal to your wholeness, will not be silenced. It begins to strip the pleasure from things that once made you feel alive, not to punish you, but to make space for something deeper. This inner discontent is the soul's way of withdrawing energy from the parts of your life that have expired. The relationships that no longer align with your truth, the roles you've been playing to keep others comfortable, the dreams you inherited but never chose. You may try to distract yourself, to travel, to work harder, to consume more, to drown the unrest in pleasure or busyness, but it follows you. Because it's not coming from outside, it's coming from the deep architecture of your psyche. It is intelligence disguised as discomfort. It is your inner world reorienting you toward transformation. Often, the mind resists this discontent. It fears the unknown. It clings to the familiar, even if the familiar is killing the spirit slowly. But the psyche cannot be tricked by logic. It speaks in feeling, and when the feeling grows unbearable, it is not asking for escape. It is asking for listening, for honesty, for surrender. You begin to notice that you no longer resonate with the stories you used to tell about yourself. Who you were is fading, but who you are becoming has not yet fully emerged. You're caught in between, a liminal space, neither here nor there. This is the most fragile and powerful moment in the human journey, when the old self is dying and the new self is not yet born. And so you drift, not aimlessly but intuitively. You begin to question everything, your purpose, your identity, your values. You begin to see that so much of what you called you was actually a collection of responses to other people's expectations. You realize how many of your choices were made in fear, how often you betrayed yourself just to belong. This is not self-pity, this is awakening. You start to feel the tension between what your life is and what your soul desires. The more you ignore it, the heavier you become. The more you listen, the more unraveled you feel. But even in the unraveling, there is a strange sense of relief, because finally, you are no longer pretending. Something ancient is stirring within you. It is the call to live authentically, no matter the cost. It is the soul reclaiming its place at the center of your life. And though it begins as discontent, what it really seeks is something sacred, freedom. As the inner discontent deepens, the psyche does not remain silent. When the conscious mind becomes too rigid, too entangled in habit and logic to perceive the shift, the unconscious begins to speak more insistently. Not in words, but in images, symbols, dreams, and strange coincidences that seem to echo from an invisible source. You begin to dream more vividly, sometimes in symbols you don't understand, sometimes with scenes so emotionally charged they stay with you long after waking. Perhaps a childhood home appears again and again. Perhaps you are chased or searching or flying. Perhaps there are animals, wolves, serpents, birds, each one carrying an instinctual message from a part of you that is trying to be heard. These dreams are not random. They are not entertainment. They are messages. The psyche is poetic. It speaks in metaphor. When the soul is on the verge of transformation, the unconscious becomes more active, more expressive, more insistent. And dreams become the threshold through which forgotten truths return to consciousness. You may also begin to notice repeating symbols in your waking life. A certain number seems to follow you. A song keeps playing everywhere you go. A phrase from a book appears on a billboard, then again in conversation. A strange animal crosses your path at a moment of decision. People call these coincidences, but the psyche does not believe in accidents. It believes in alignment. When life begins to mirror your inner world with strange accuracy, it is a sign. The boundary between the unconscious and the conscious is thinning. The symbolic world is bleeding into the literal. Your soul is no longer content to speak only in whispers. It is trying to initiate you. You may feel drawn to certain myths, archetypes, or spiritual traditions. You may find yourself obsessed with symbols you don't yet understand, like the phoenix, the labyrinth, the moon. This is not mere curiosity, it is attraction from the soul. These symbols are keys. They belong to the architecture of your transformation. They are here to guide you through the unknown. There may be an overwhelming sense that something is coming. Not fear, but anticipation, as if reality itself is preparing for a shift. The wind changes, the air feels different. Time slows down in strange moments. Ordinary things take on a hidden weight. You begin to feel the presence of something larger than your rational mind, something ancient, patient, and deeply intelligent. This is the symbolic life awakening within you. Most people ignore it. They dismiss dreams as nonsense, synchronicities as luck, symbols as superstition. But to those willing to see it, those brave enough to ask why these patterns haunt them, the psyche opens like a book, and every symbol becomes a sentence, every dream a paragraph in the story of your becoming. You start to realize that your unconscious mind is not a chaotic reservoir of forgotten impulses. It is a living world, a place of memory, myth, and instruction. And when it intensifies, it is not to confuse you. It is to prepare you. The symbols do not arrive by accident. They arrive because the old language has failed. They arrive because the transformation coming cannot be navigated by intellect alone. It requires intuition. It requires surrender. It requires the eyes of the soul. And so, the dreams continue. The patterns intensify. The metaphors deepen. And though the conscious mind still tries to maintain control, something deeper has already taken the lead. As the symbols grow louder, as the dreams begin to pull at your conscious mind, you find yourself retreating, not as a strategy, not as a choice, but as an instinct. The external world, once vibrant and full of meaning, now feels like a foreign landscape. You move through it, but you are no longer anchored in it. Conversations feel thin, laughter echoes without depth. The roles you once played so skillfully, colleague, friend, partner, achiever, begin to feel like costumes worn too long. People may ask what's wrong, and you won't quite know how to answer, because nothing is wrong. In the conventional sense, you're not sad, you're not broken, but you are shifting, and that shift is inward. There is a subtle gravitational pull happening, not toward others, but toward your own interior. You begin canceling plans without guilt. You begin sitting in silence for long stretches of time, not because you have nothing to do, but because doing no longer satisfies. There is something sacred beginning to stir in the stillness. You start seeking solitude not for escape, but for communion. The psyche, before it transforms, draws back its energy. Just as the tide retreats before a wave, your spirit pulls away from surface living in order to gather strength for something deeper. It is a holy withdrawal, a descent, not into despair, but into depth. And in that descent, your senses change. You no longer crave stimulation. You begin to observe rather than react. The music you once loved feels noisy. The screens you once scrolled feel hollow. Small talk begins to irritate. You don't have the energy to explain yourself, nor the desire to pretend. You begin to value quiet above all else, not because you're shrinking, but because you're listening. You are listening to what's beneath the noise. Beneath the conditioning, beneath the performance, your world becomes more internal. Thoughts that once floated on the surface now descend into questions of purpose, authenticity, mortality. You ask yourself, who am I without all these identities? What would I be if I stopped performing? Why do I feel lonelier in a crowd than I do in silence? And in this withdrawal, you will feel misunderstood. Friends may say you've changed, that you're distant or cold or not yourself. But what they don't understand is that you're not retreating from them. You're returning to yourself. You are moving from the outer circumference of your life into its very center. At times, it may feel like exile, like you're disappearing from the world you once built, but you are not vanishing, you are distilling. The psyche is simplifying what has become too complex. It is dissolving what has become too noisy. It is preparing the ground for a new form of being, one rooted not in obligation or performance, but in presence. Even your body participates in this withdrawal. You may feel fatigue or sensitivity to noise, or a strange pull toward rest. This is not weakness. This is your nervous system adjusting to a new vibration, one that is no longer driven by external validation, but by internal alignment. You may notice yourself spending long hours alone, not lonely, but deeply aware of your own presence. You may begin writing in journals, not to record events, but to decode emotions. You may walk for hours, not to exercise, but to think. You may stop reaching out to others, not in bitterness, but because no one can walk this inward path for you. And the farther inward you go, the less you are interested in returning to the surface. When you have withdrawn far enough from the noise of the outer world, the silence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, something unexpected appears. Not light, but shadow. It begins with a discomfort you can't name. A haunting memory surfaces during a quiet moment. A painful truth you buried years ago comes knocking. An emotion you've always denied, rage, jealousy, despair suddenly rises with undeniable force. You may feel as if you are regressing, unraveling, becoming someone you thought you'd long outgrown. But this is not regression. It is revelation. The shadow is everything within you that you have disowned, denied, or suppressed. It is the parts of you that were deemed unlovable by your parents, your society, your younger self. It is the truths you feared would make you unacceptable, and it does not vanish simply because you ignore it. The shadow waits, patiently, quietly, until the psyche begins to shift. Then it emerges, not to destroy, but to demand integration. You might suddenly be overcome by old shame, by patterns you thought you had healed. You might lash out or retreat or weep without reason. You might find yourself questioning your entire story. Was I ever truly myself, or just a series of performances? This confrontation is not gentle. It is not clean. The shadow does not speak in polite language. It is raw. It is primal. It brings with it the weight of the unlived life, the grief of the authentic self that was once sacrificed for acceptance, survival, or control. You begin to see how much of your life has been shaped by fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being judged, fear of not being enough. You begin to see the masks you've worn not as deceit, but as defense. Every perfectionistic tendency, every harsh self-criticism, every toxic relationship you tolerated, it all begins to make sense. These were not random behaviors. They were shadows in disguise. They were adaptations that once protected you, but now imprison you. And now that you've stepped out of the noise and into the silence, the shadow no longer has to hide. It rises, not as an enemy, but as a messenger. It wants to be seen. It needs to be seen, because what you do not bring into the light will continue to control you from the dark. At this stage, you will be tempted to distract yourself, to numb, to run. The pain of seeing your own darkness, the manipulations, the insecurities, the hidden resentments, can feel unbearable, but avoidance only feeds the shadow. What it seeks is not punishment. It seeks wholeness. You may have a moment, perhaps in the middle of the night, perhaps in the middle of a quiet walk, when the full weight of your unacknowledged self crashes into your chest, and you will not be able to unsee it. The stories you've told about who you are will fracture. The narrative of "I'm fine" will fall apart. And in that moment, if you have the courage to stay present, something extraordinary begins to occur. You start to feel compassion for yourself, not as the perfect being you tried to be, but as the flawed, fragmented, deeply human being you are. You begin to understand your younger self not with shame, but with tenderness. You start to see your defense mechanisms not as failures, but as strategies for survival. And slowly, the monster in the mirror becomes a wounded child, not innocent, but worthy of love. This is the sacred violence of inner transformation. It breaks before it builds. It reveals before it redeems. You are not being punished. You are being purified. And yet, the process is not linear. The shadow doesn't reveal itself all at once. It comes in waves. It tests your capacity to witness. It pushes you to the edge again and again, not because it wants you to fall, but because it wants to know. Will you finally choose to see all of you? This is where many turn back. They say, "It's too much." They long for the comfort of distraction, for the comfort of certainty, for the comfort of identity. But once the shadow has appeared, it cannot be forgotten. It will live with you until you either collapse into it or rise through it. And rising requires something that cannot be taught, only chosen. After the shadow has been seen, after the masks begin to slip and the illusions start to fracture, a strange and quiet voice begins to rise. It does not shout. It does not command. It does not seduce. It simply calls. It calls you by your true name, not the name society gave you, not the name you earned through roles or success, but the name you have always known beneath the noise. This voice is not external. It comes from the deepest part of you, from the center, from the soul, and its message is simple, live, but live as who you truly are. But what does that mean? Authenticity is not about rebellion or being loud for its own sake. It is not about discarding everything that once mattered. It is about uncovering what actually matters. It is about aligning your outer life with your inner truth, no matter how much dismantling that requires. This call feels different from ambition, different from desire. It does not want more. It wants real. It does not push forward. It draws inward. It doesn't promise comfort. It promises meaning. And it often arrives in a moment of radical stillness, when everything you thought you were collapses, and what remains is something startlingly honest. You begin to recognize the falseness in your old life. The words you said just to fit in, the things you pursued only to feel worthy, the relationships that were built on performance rather than presence. You begin to see how much you have edited yourself just to be accepted, how much you've betrayed your own needs just to belong, and now you no longer can. The body reacts to this call before the mind can make sense of it. You begin to feel sick in spaces that once felt safe. You begin to lose energy for people pleasing. You feel an aching need to speak truth, even if your voice trembles. You stop nodding in agreement just to keep the peace. You stop saying yes when your entire soul is screaming no. The call to authenticity does not ask for perfection. It asks for honesty, and that honesty may cost you. It may cost you approval. It may cost you convenience. It may cost you relationships that depended on your silence. But what it offers in return is something the false self could never attain: integrity. Not in the moral sense, but in the structural one. You become whole again. You will begin to sense when you are out of alignment. Even the smallest lie to yourself, staying in the wrong place, speaking the wrong words, tolerating the wrong energy, will feel like a wound. You become more sensitive, not less. You feel everything more deeply, but this sensitivity is not weakness. It is truth becoming unbearable to ignore. In this space, decisions feel heavier, not because you're indecisive, but because every choice now shapes your becoming. You are no longer interested in what looks good. You are only interested in what is true. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and begin asking, "What is mine to do?" And slowly, without announcement, the old scaffolding of your personality begins to fall away. The version of you built on pleasing, achieving, adapting, surviving fades. In its place, something ancient and real starts to rise. A self not created but remembered, not invented but revealed. This is not a return to who you once were. It is the emergence of who you've always been underneath who you had to become. But the call is not a single moment. It echoes. It tests your commitment. It shows you how often you still default to performance. It challenges you when the path gets lonely, when no one else understands why you've changed, why you've grown quiet, why you no longer play along. Because the authentic path is not loud. It is not crowded. It often begins in the wilderness of your own honesty. And so you walk, not away from the world, but deeper into yourself, not in search of answers, but in search of alignment, not to impress, but to become.